I have been doing this for a long time, and the single biggest mistake I see homeowners make over and over again is reaching for their wallet before they reach for their pruning shears. Because here is the truth that the garden centers and the landscaping companies do not want you to hear. The most beautiful landscapes in the world are not beautiful because of how much money was spent on them. They are beautiful because of how well they were understood. And today, I'm going to prove that to you, step by step, with $0 spent. Why most people spend money on the wrong things. First, let me paint you a picture, and I want you to tell me honestly if this sounds familiar. You walk outside, you look at your yard, and something just feels off. Maybe it looks a little tired, a little overgrown, a little patchy in places. And your first instinct is to go buy something. A new plant, a bag of fertilizer, maybe a few colorful annuals to stick in the front bed. I get it. I have done it myself more times than I care to admit. But here is the problem with that approach. You are adding to a system that you have not yet fixed. It is like putting new furniture in a room that has not been cleaned. It does not matter how nice the couch is. The room still feels wrong. And that is exactly what happens in a landscape when we keep layering new purchases on top of unresolved problems. What I have learned after nearly 5 decades of doing this professionally is that the foundation of a great-looking landscape is almost never something you buy. It is something you do. It is an action, not a purchase. And once you understand that, everything changes. Now I know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking, okay, but my yard is genuinely bare. There is nothing there. I need plants. And maybe that is true for some of you, and we are going to get to that later in this video in a way that might surprise you. But for the vast majority of people watching this, I would bet good money that your yard has plenty in it already. The problem is not what is missing. The problem is what is in the way. And that brings me to the first, and honestly the most powerful thing you can do today without spending a single penny. The power of editing. Remove before you add. I want you to think about your landscape the way a sculptor thinks about a block of marble. The sculptor does not add material to reveal the final piece. They remove it. And that is exactly the mindset shift that transforms a landscape from cluttered and chaotic into something that looks genuinely intentional and designed. Walk around your yard right now, and I want you to look at it with fresh eyes. Pretend you are seeing it for the first time. And I want you to ask yourself one question about every single plant, every shrub, every tree you see. Is this adding to the space or is it just occupying it? Because there is a big difference between a plant that contributes to the beauty of your landscape and a plant that is simply taking up room and resources. Overcrowded plantings are one of the most common problems I see in residential landscapes, and it is completely free to fix. When you have too many plants crammed together, a few things happen. First, none of them look good because you cannot actually see any of them. They are all fighting each other for space and light, and the result is this wall of green that has no definition, no depth, no character. Second, they are all competing for the same water and nutrients, so all of them are weaker than they should be. You are not helping any of them, you are just crowding all of them. So the first thing I want you to do is pull out what does not belong. And yes, that might mean removing plants that are perfectly healthy. I know that feels wrong. I have had this argument with homeowners more times than I can count, and I always get the same look, like I just suggested something criminal. But a healthy plant in the wrong place or in an overcrowded bed is not contributing to your landscape. It is competing with it. Now, while you are out there editing, I also want you to look at the edges of your beds. Because one of the most dramatic and completely free improvements you can make to any landscape is a clean, crisp edge between your beds and your lawn. There is something almost scientific about how much a defined edge improves the appearance of a garden. It signals intention. It tells anyone who looks at it that this space is cared for and considered. You do not need a special tool necessarily. A flat spade does the job. And the difference before and after is honestly shocking every single time. Pruning, the right way, changes everything now. I want to talk about pruning, and I want to be very specific here because pruning done wrong is one of the most damaging things you can do to your landscape. And unfortunately, wrong pruning is everywhere. I drive through neighborhoods and I see it constantly, and it genuinely pains me. Honestly, it keeps me up at night. I am not even joking about that. The most common mistake is what I call clubbing plants into submission. You have probably seen it. Shrubs hacked into perfect spheres. Hedges cut into rigid rectangles. Trees lopped flat across the top. And I understand the impulse. It looks tidy in a very immediate, surface-level way. The problem is, it looks nothing like a plant. It looks like a green geometric shape that happens to be growing in your yard. And over time, those plants become weaker, more prone to disease, and honestly less attractive with every passing season. The approach I want you to take instead is to prune in a way that reveals and enhances the plant's natural form. Because natural forms in plants and trees are almost always more attractive than anything we impose on them. What that means in practice is, we are doing mostly what we call thinning cuts rather than heading cuts. A heading cut is when you cut a branch in half. You are cutting it somewhere in the middle and leaving a stub. This is what produces that flush of weak, chaotic regrowth that makes a plant look worse over time. A thinning cut is when you follow a branch all the way back to where it originates, either the main trunk or a larger parent branch, and you remove it entirely. This opens up the plant, creates depth, allows light in, and the plant looks better immediately. Not in a few weeks. Immediately. And here is something a lot of people do not realize. When you thin a plant properly, you can actually see through it a little bit. Not completely, but just enough that there is a sense of layering and depth in the landscape. That quality of depth is one of the things that separates a landscape that feels designed from one that just feels planted. And it costs you nothing. Now, I also want to address tree pruning specifically because there is an important technique that goes beyond basic thinning. When you need to reduce the height or length of a branch without making it look hacked, you use what is called drop crotching. Instead of cutting that branch off somewhere in the middle, which leaves an ugly stub and causes weak regrowth, you cut it back to a smaller side branch that can take over and become the new leader. The result looks completely natural and the tree maintains its structural integrity. This is how the professionals do it. And now you know how to do it too. One more thing on pruning, and then we will move on. Do not put anything on the cuts. No black tar compounds, no pruning paint, none of it. A clean cut heals beautifully on its own with natural air circulation. Those compounds crack over time and actually create hiding spots for pests and disease. The one exception, and this is a real one, so pay attention, is if you are pruning oaks or elms during the growing season. In that case, a latex-based paint right over the cut is appropriate because it prevents beetles from spreading diseases like oak wilt and Dutch elm disease. But outside of that very specific situation, leave the cuts alone and let the tree do what it has been doing for thousands of years. Mulch, you already have. All right, I want to talk about something that I think is genuinely underappreciated by most homeowners, and it is sitting in your yard right now. Maybe even in bags on the side of your house that you are about to throw away. If you have trees, you have mulch. If you have been pruning, which you have now that we have covered that section, you have mulch. Grass clippings, fallen leaves, chipped branches, wood debris from pruning. All of it can serve as top-dressing mulch for your beds, and this stuff is, in my view, a mini miracle for your landscape. What does mulch actually do? Let me walk you through it because it is more impressive than most people give it credit for. It protects the soil surface from the beating that direct sun and heavy rain can cause. It conserves moisture so your plants need less water. It breaks down over time and enriches the soil underneath. It suppresses weeds in a way that is almost shockingly effective once you have a proper layer established. And it makes your beds look finished and intentional, which goes right back to that principle we talked about earlier of communicating care and intention through your landscape. Now I want to be clear about how to apply it correctly. You want a layer that is roughly 2 to 3 inches deep across your beds. And you want to keep it pulled back just slightly from the base of your plants and trees, maybe an inch or two. Because when you pile mulch right up against a trunk, and I see this constantly, you create a moist environment right at the base that invites disease and pests. People call it a mulch volcano. I call it expensive to fix down the road. You do not need to buy mulch. Run your pruned branches through a chipper if you have one. Rake your leaves and use them. Let your grass clippings do double duty. This is material you are already generating in your yard every single season. Put it to work. The secret weapon. Soil life. Now, this is the part of this video where I get genuinely excited, because this is something that most people have never thought about, and yet it is the single most powerful thing happening in your landscape, whether you know about it or not. Your soil is alive, or at least it should be. Healthy soil is absolutely teeming with beneficial bacteria, beneficial fungi, protozoa, nematodes. This is a whole ecosystem happening right underneath your feet, and most homeowners have no idea it exists. And that is a problem because this life in the soil is what determines whether your plants are healthy, whether they resist pests and disease, and whether your lawn is dense and strong or thin and struggling. The good news is you can begin feeding that soil life for free right now. Here is how. Stop using synthetic fertilizer. I know, bear with me. Synthetic fertilizer, especially in summer, is volatile. It can burn your plants, and it feeds the plant directly while doing essentially nothing for the life in the soil. When you pull back from that and allow the natural ecosystem in your soil to develop, you start to see results that no bag of synthetic fertilizer can produce. A lawn with genuinely healthy soil does not get the same fungal problems, does not need the same amount of water, and does not require constant inputs to look good. If you have been composting at all, even casually, you already have a tool for this. Compost added to your beds is one of the best ways to introduce and feed beneficial soil life. Same with earthworm castings if you have them. Spread it thin. Work it lightly into the top layer. You are essentially inoculating your soil with life, and the results compound over time. And here's the thing about weeds that might change how you think about them. Weeds are frequently a symptom. They are telling you something about the condition of your soil. Weak, compacted, nutrient-depleted soil is an invitation for weeds because the lawn or the plants that belong there are too weak to crowd them out. Build the soil, and the lawn becomes dense enough and strong enough that weeds simply cannot get a foothold. That is not a theory. That is what I have seen happen over and over again in landscapes that committed to building soil health. It just takes patience, which I know is the hardest part. Watering smarter, not more. I want to tell you something that sounds counterintuitive, but is honestly one of the most important things I have learned in nearly 50 years of doing this. Watering more does not make plants look better. Watering correctly does. And those two things are very different. Nothing kills a plant faster than too much water. I say that knowing underwatering gets all the attention, but overwatering is at least as common, and it causes a cascade of problems. Too many weeds, too much fungal disease, shallow root systems that make plants weaker and less drought tolerant over time, poor performance all around. The goal I always come back to is to water as little as possible while having everything look like it does not need watering. That is the target. Not always easy to hit, I will be honest, but always worth aiming for. Here is a free and immediately applicable example. If you see your tomatoes wilting at 2 in the afternoon on a hot day, That is not necessarily a cry for water. That is often just a response to heat. Many plants do this. They wilt in the afternoon and recover overnight. If you water them every time you see that midday droop, you are compounding the problem. Heat combined with too much water is actually more dangerous than heat with slightly not enough. So wait. Check again in the morning. Still wilted? Water it. Looking perfectly fine? It was just being dramatic. And plants can be extraordinarily dramatic. We have all met someone like that. The other free improvement is timing. Water just before sunrise or right as the sun is coming up. You lose less to evaporation and the sun dries everything off quickly, which cuts your fungal disease risk significantly. Watering late at night is what you want to avoid because that moisture just sits there all night long, and fungal disease absolutely loves that situation. Design without dollars. Repetition, mass planting, and simplicity. Now, I want to spend some time on landscape design principles because this is where so many people, even people who have been gardening for years, leave a lot of beauty on the table. And these principles cost absolutely nothing to apply. They just require a shift in how you think about what you are doing out there. The first principle is repetition. When I walk through a landscape that feels cohesive and designed, I almost always find that a small number of plants are being used in bold, repeated ways throughout the space. Not one of this here and one of that there, and one of something else over there. That approach produces a landscape that looks like a plant collection rather than a design, and there is a difference. Pick a small plant palette, maybe 3 to 5 plants that work well together and work well in your conditions, and then use them in mass plantings throughout the space. When plants mass together and bloom together, the impact is extraordinary. It creates bold sweeps of color and texture that read beautifully from a distance. And it is actually easier to maintain because you are not managing a dozen different species with a dozen different needs. You are managing a few really well. The second principle is simplicity. I have seen homeowners try to put so much into their landscapes that the result becomes visually exhausting. Every bed a different color scheme, every corner a different theme, plants from a dozen different climates all jammed together because they were pretty at the nursery that day. I understand the temptation completely, but the gardens that consistently stop you in your tracks are almost always simple. They are considered. They know what they are trying to be, and they commit to it. And the third principle, this one surprises people every time, is that you should be thinking about the spaces between plants as much as the plants themselves. Negative space in a landscape is not empty space. It is breathing room. It is what allows the eye to rest and then focus on what you actually want it to see. A landscape with no negative space is a landscape where nothing stands out because everything is competing equally for attention. Creating spaces that feel intentional. One of the most consistent things I have seen separate. A great landscape from a forgettable one is not the plants. It is the spaces. And I want to be very clear about what I mean by a space, because I do not mean anything complicated or expensive. A space is simply an area of your landscape that has a defined purpose and a sense of enclosure. It can be as simple as a bench positioned under a shade tree with a flat stone or two in front of it. That is a space. It gives that corner of the yard a reason to exist beyond just growing grass. And when a landscape is made up of a series of these purposeful spaces rather than just a flat, undifferentiated area of plants and lawn, it becomes something you want to be in rather than just something you look at from the window. Think about your front yard and your backyard as a series of segments, each with its own character. They do not have to be complicated or expensive. They just have to feel considered. A simple gravel path that winds through a bed, a grouping of containers near a door, a small area of decomposed granite with a tree growing out of it. These things cost very little or nothing if you use materials you already have, and they transform the feeling of a space completely. The challenge in landscape design is not to make the garden look natural. The challenge is to make the people in it feel natural. And that distinction matters more than almost anything else. A garden succeeds when the people using it feel at ease, feel like the space was made for them, feel invited in rather than kept out. That is the goal. And you can get there with nothing more than thoughtful editing and a willingness to think about how you actually use the space. The lawn truth nobody talks about. I want to say something that might be a little uncomfortable, and I'm going to say it anyway because after nearly 5 decades of doing this, I have just stopped worrying about that. You do not need a lawn to have a beautiful landscape. Before you close the video, hear me out. I am not saying tear it all out. What I'm saying is that a lot of people have lawn by default rather than by choice. It was there when they moved in. They assumed a front yard means a front lawn. And if nobody is actually using that lawn, if nobody is running on it, playing on it, or gathering on it, then it is costing you water and maintenance for essentially no return whatsoever. A lawn is a fantastic element when it is being used. Kids running around, a dog chasing a ball, people sitting out on a warm evening. That is what lawn is genuinely for and used. That way it is hard to beat. But as a visual filler, as something to walk across to reach your front door, there are lower maintenance, lower water options that are honestly often more beautiful. Now, for those of you keeping your lawn, here is the single most overlooked free improvement you can make today. Stop bagging your grass clippings and throwing them away. Leave them on the lawn. When you are never mowing more than 1/3 of the blade at a time, those clippings break down fast and feed your soil directly. Free mulch, free compost, free fertilizer after every single mow. Most people bag all of that up and then go buy fertilizer to replace exactly what they just threw in the trash. Please stop doing that. Propagation, the ultimate free plant hack. All right, I promised you earlier in this video that we would get to the part where I show you how to get more plants for free. And here we are. Because if your landscape genuinely is a little bare, if you do need more plant material in certain areas, buying is not your only option. Not even close. Propagation is the practice of creating new plants from existing ones. And the simplest form of it, the one anyone can do with almost any plant and zero equipment, is taking cuttings. You find a healthy stem on a plant you already have, or that a neighbor has, a friend has, a family member has. You cut a piece roughly 4 to 6 inches long, you strip the lower leaves, you stick it in some moist soil or even a cup of water in some cases, and you wait. And a significant percentage of the time that cutting develops roots and becomes a whole new plant. Perennials can often be divided. If you have a large clump of ornamental grass or a perennial that has spread over the years, you can dig it up, split it into multiple sections, and replant those sections in different areas of your yard. What was one plant becomes 3 or 4 or 5, and all of them are free. The same goes for seeds. A lot of plants self-seed prolifically if you let them. Instead of deadheading everything the moment it finishes blooming, let some of those seed heads develop. Collect them. Dry them, plant them next season. I have filled entire beds this way over the years, and the cost was precisely nothing. There is something deeply satisfying about it too, I will be honest. It feels a little bit like cheating the system, in the best possible way. Putting it all together. So let me bring this all together for you because I want to make sure you leave this video with a clear, practical path forward. The most beautiful landscape you can imagine is not behind a price tag. It is behind a set of principles. Edit before you add. Prune in a way that reveals natural form. Use the mulch and the material your yard is already producing. Build the life in your soil. Water smarter and less. Design with repetition and simplicity. Create spaces that feel purposeful. And never waste what your plants are already giving you for free. You do not need to spend a penny to start. You just need to start. Get outside, Look at your landscape with honest eyes and ask yourself what it is telling you, because it is telling you something. And once you learn to listen, this work becomes not just effective, but genuinely one of the most rewarding things you will ever do with your time.